this week's Chapter 1. This week's Chapter 1 is Hammocks, Handguns, and Hearsay. Chapter 1. Hell in a handbasket. That's what I'd call how this day, this week, heck, this month was turning out. Hell in a handbasket. Oh, I muttered and shifted a little bit in my seat. I had to get a gander at what was going on across the grassy median at the smelly dog groomer shop. What's happening now? I asked and leaned a little more to the right. I had to get a clear vision of what was going on. After all, I was the one who found the dead body inside. Not just any dead body, Colt Lincoln, as in the Colt Lincoln. Yep. The famous bounty hunter who had his own television show, Colt Lincoln. I looked out the window and took in all the surroundings. The sun had started to set and several tourists noticed, taking their phones out to get that amazing shot so they could put it on their latest social media with hashtag sunset or hashtag Daniel Boone National Forest. Off in the distance, I noticed Wayne Newton, not the Wayne Newton, like Colt Lincoln, but our local Wayne Newton, who did take professional photographs of the national forest we called home. It was my meeting with him to discuss hiring him to take photos of my upcoming fall wedding that even brought me to the smelly dog groomers in the first place. Well, in a roundabout way. Chester, my soon-to-be stepdog, had an appointment to get a bath and nail trim at the smelly dog. So I thought it would be easiest to kill two birds with one stone, not happen upon the body where it was a kill one bounty hunter with one bullet kind of thing. I'd been waiting on Wayne Newton to text me, and when he did, it was after finding the body of the dead bounty hunter, after which Sheriff Al Himmer told me to wait outside of the shop. So I found myself wandering over to the coffee shop where it was much easier to wait with a cup of coffee. Still, I glanced around and noticed just how deceiving the Daniel Boone National Forest really was. It was like a seduction of a beautiful woman who on the outside was stunning, but where on the inside deep and dark secrets loomed. Pulling up the mug to my lips, I let out a little snort. The tourist lying on the blanket in the middle of the grassy median between me and the smelly dog groomer had no idea that just a few feet away, the star of the show they loved and the bounty hunter they'd made famous, Colt Lincoln, lay in there, dead. My eyes lowered as they warded off the last bit of the sun as it began to dip toward the horizon. The sky transformed into a stunning canvas of warm hues. Shades of orange, pink, and gold streaked across the sky, blending together seamlessly like a watercolor painting. Again, my eyes wandered to the grassy median, the park-like setting between the one-way streets of downtown Normal, Kentucky. The lush green trees, the ragged hillsides of the forest were bathed in the warm golden light, creating a serene and tranquil atmosphere. But here I was, anxiously awaiting what questions Sheriff Al Himmer had for me. I looked behind me into the Trails Coffee Shop, the local coffee house, and over to the living wall where Gert Hobson, the owner of Trails Coffee, had paid a pretty penny for a fancy architect to design to reflect seasonal foliage of the forest. The wildflowers popped around in vibrant colors, which would make anyone smile, but not me, not today. Chester was lying up against the wall next to the fountain-style dog bowl kept there for the four-legged friends, since most of the time the patrons, who were mainly hikers and campers, traveled with their furry companions. Seeing he was settled, I turned back to the window. The colors of the sky had intensified as the sun sank, casting a rosy glow across everything the last bit of rays touched. The familiar shuffle of Gert's hiking boots echoed across closer and closer, and without looking, I slid my cup of coffee along the table just shy of the edge for her to refill. "Colonel Holtz is there," Gert Hobson said, spilling the turned coffee pot away from my mug at the reminder of the murder that had taken place a couple hours earlier across the street. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. She plucked a couple of napkins from the center of the table and wiped up the streaming liquid crawling to the edge of the table before it could waterfall to the floor. Here comes Al. I scooted my chair back in place and acted as if I had not been glued to the Trails Coffee front window. Don't forget the packages I put together for the campground, Gert reminded me. I had called Gert earlier in the day to let her know that I was dropping Chester off at Smelly Dog and needed to pick up the packages of coffees and filters that she graciously donated for the rental campers and bungalows. Instead of grabbing the boxes after I dropped Chester off, Hank, my fiance, his sister Ellis, and I were going to stick around downtown and have a good cup of coffee, maybe visit with Gert for a while, and wait for Ethel Biddle to finish grooming Chester. Speaking of Ethel Biddle, my mind curled back to find Colt. Ethel wasn't there. Orlean was there, though. I shook my head to clear it off of anything linking the idea that I was going to put my nose into another murder when a flash of a shadow outside the window took me out of my thoughts. I also put some special Hiker's Morning Blend in the complimentary box, Gert noted, as she put an empty mug on the table and filled it up. That's for you, she told Sheriff Al Himmer as soon as he walked through the door. Al gave a solid nod to Gert before he reached the back of the chair across from me. The legs screeched across the floor as his eyes fixed on me like he was trying to study what I was thinking. All right, May, let's start from the beginning, Sheriff Al said, his brows furrowed in confusion after his attempt at trying to read me. It went without saying that Al Himmer got the sheriff's job after his uncle, Judge Gabe Himmer, had appointed him for the job as temporary replacement. And like most things around these parts, we didn't like change. And well, once you got into an elected official job, it was hard to be scooted or booted out. And that's how we got stuck with Al. Dottie Swaggart was right when she said he was fumbly like the old television deputy Sheriff Barney Fife from the Andy Griffith Show. He even had the appearance of a much younger version. The tall, thin, long-legged man with a goofy sense of humor. At times, it was endearing, but not so much today. Me, Hank, and Ellis were going to meet with Wayne Newton here at Trails Coffee to discuss wedding photos. It wasn't like Ellis, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, had a say in it. All right, May, let's start from the beginning, Sheriff Al said, his brows furrowed in confusion after his attempt at trying to read me. It went without saying that Al Himmer got the sheriff's job after his uncle, Judge Gabe Himmer, had appointed it to him, but just as a temporary replacement. But like most things around these parts, we didn't like change. And well, once you got into an elected official job, it was hard to be scooted or booted. And that's how we got stuck with Al. Dottie Swaggart was right when she said he was fumbly like the old television deputy Sheriff Barney Fife from the Andy Griffith Show. He even had the appearance of a much younger version, the tall, thin, long-legged man with a goofy sense of humor. At times it was endearing, but not so much today. Me, Hank, and Ellis were going to meet with Wayne Newton here at Trails Coffee to discuss the wedding photos, I told him. It wasn't like Ellis, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, had a hand in it, or that we were very close. But I'd started seeing a side of Ellis where just a kind hand or even a nice gesture would help her blossom into the person I often saw her hide behind. I didn't include how I'd made the meeting with Wayne to be around Chester's appointment. Again, kind of like that kill two birds with one stone thing I'd said about Colt. The door was open like always, I told Al, and I walked in with Chester. I shrugged. I didn't see Ethel in there, but I'd heard Orlean scream. I also left out the part about Chester giving out the hunting dog howl he'd let go of. And I'd found her standing over Colt's body, freaking out. How did the body look, he asked. Dead? I said. I knew what he was trying to get me to say, but I wanted him to say it, not me. Not me on the record of whatever it was that he would write down in that little notebook of his. You found Colt dead inside the Smelly Dog groomer, holding a hot pink hair curler that belonged to Dottie Swaggart. He took that small notebook from the pocket of his brown sheriff's vest and tossed it on top of the table like it had some sort of effect on me. I pushed a strand of my long, curly, honey blonde hair behind my shoulder and raised a brow. Is that correct? He finally asked. slowly draping his right arm over the back of the chair and then using his other hand to reach for the full cup of coffee Gert had left for him. I could still hear the bell ding over the front door of the smelly dog groomer. Help! Help! I'd heard Orlean Ross screaming at the top of her lungs, and it was like I wasn't even in my own body. Chester had growled like he had done when he was a hunting dog right before Orlean barreled out of the back room. May! The way she gasped my name still sent goosebumps up and down my spine, leaving me with a cold shiver. You know, those kind of cold, bone-chilling shivers that no matter what you do, you can't get them to leave your body? That kind of shiver. And it settled deep into my bones, and it was still there. I'm not going to say it was Dottie Swaggart's pink sponge curlers, I told Al. I wasn't going to peg my best friend as a murderer, though her sudden disappearance did have me slightly baffled. It did look bad on Dottie's part, and she'd kind of been dating Colt Lincoln, and she'd found out only that he'd been dating her for information, probably to use in one of his upcoming shows. And she did give him the old heave-ho, but not without publicly trashing the man, which didn't look good on her. And when I found him dead with a sponge curler that suspiciously looked kind of like the one she used, didn't look good. Plus, she wasn't answering my calls or texts, and that didn't look good either. But I wasn't going to tell out any of my thoughts. And didn't you see anyone else in the groomers when you found him? Besides Orlean, that is, Hank asked, scratching his head and curling his forefinger around the handle of the mug. No, Al, I was just there to drop Chester off to be groomed. I didn't expect to find Colt there, I replied in a shaking voice. I figured on Orlean and Ethel to be there, but not Colt. Well, it just doesn't add up, Al said, leaning back in his chair, letting go of the mug. Why would Dottie's hair curler be there, and why would Colt be holding it? Maybe it wasn't Dottie's. I threw it out there. Why didn't you get it tested for any sort of DNA, if there's hair on it or a fingerprint? Yeah. He was quick to answer before he excused himself for a moment to make a phone call. It didn't take a master sleuth to see Dottie Swaggart had popped into Al's suspect list, taking the #1 spot. A list where #1 was not a winning spot. I tried to recall the sponge curler in my mind to see if there was any sort of details that I could compare it to the ones that Dottie used, but nothing was coming to me. Time. I needed time to process. It wasn't unusual for a little shock after something like finding a dead body to wash over someone, and even for the events right after become a little less clear. And in time, those small bits and pieces would come back. But right then, all I remembered was bending down to see if Orlean was okay after she fainted and called 911. Al came back to the table and sat down. Do you know what's going to descend upon Normal if we don't find out who killed Colt Lincoln? Al's confidence waned, giving me a slight edge to this here conversation. When the world finds out the most famous bounty hunter in America is murdered, I snorted. Yeah, I know. Boy, did I know. Better than anyone in Normal, Kentucky. Heck, for that matter, better than anyone in Kentucky after my history of being the wife of the biggest Ponzi scheme crook in all of American history. Yeah, I reckon you do know. Al sat up and leaned on his elbows on the edge of the table. My phone vibrated face down on top of the table. Dottie, he asked after I picked it up and sent it to voicemail. No, I was hoping. My lips tugged a smile. It was Wayne Newton, I said. The zealot? Al's eyes narrowed. He's not a zealot. He's passionate and a great artist, I said, though Wayne was the one who liked to live as a nomad in the forest. It was like his art and life, being one with each other, gave him opportunity to take real beauty, not the surface things of the forest. The way of his lens captured the stars and the night sky over top the Daniel Boone National Forest was something I'd never seen before. And soon he was going to be world famous. Or at least he would be after I got Abby Fonbonds, my sister-in-law and marketing genius, to spread the word about him. He would be a viral sensation. I need to take this, I wagged the phone. When you're finished, I want you to come back over to the smelly dog. Al stood up. The chair smacked the floor after he fumbled around a bit. Then he went down to pick it up and his rump bumped the table, almost knocking over the coffee mug. I waved my hand and put my phone up to my ear. Hey, Wayne, I greeted him and dug into my jeans pocket to grab some cash to leave a tip. I know we're going to meet up tonight, but something has come up. Can we meet later this week to discuss the wedding? Wayne mumbled something about some of his buddies coming in and he was going to be busy for the week. I'd seen him in the park a few minutes before Al had walked into the coffee shop, so I glanced out the window to see if he was still there, and I didn't see him. That's fine. The wedding isn't until this fall, so we have some time, I told him, as the coffee shop glass window rattled from a gang of motorcycles driving past. It was hard not to notice them. There had to be at least 50 of them, and they were so loud, even the conversation in the coffee shop had stopped, and a few of the customers had walked near the window to watch them drive past. It wasn't unusual for people to drive their motorcycles through the forest on a gorgeous day. The scenery was breathtaking, and the weather was perfect, but I didn't recall ever seeing that many. It was unusual to see a lot of them wearing the same jacket and motorcycle clothing that got your attention and said that this was a real motorcycle gang. I had heard there was a bikers convention going on. Gert had joined me at the window. Maybe I need to make a biker's brew, she said as I hung up with Wayne. You're so smart, I laughed and pointed to Chester. Do you care if he lays here until Hank gets done? Hank and his partner, Jerry Truman, had rented the empty back room of the coffee house when they decided to quit law enforcement together and open up a private investigation office. They'd only gotten tedious jobs that kept them busy, and today was no different. While Chester was going to be at his appointment at the Smelly Dog Groomer, B and Ellis were going to hang out at Charles Coffee to visit with Gert while Hank did some work in the office. Colt Lincoln changed all that. Well, at least most of the plans had changed. Ellis had gone on and walked down to the Normal Diner where her husband, Ty Randall, owns the diner. Al had asked me to stay around to get my statement, and there was no reason for Ellis or Hank to hang out. They'd not seen anything, and so there I was. Well, of course, he's always welcome to stay here, Gert said about Chester. I knew she wouldn't have a problem, but it was always nice to ask and not assume. Chester would come to Trail's Coffee with Hank, so he truly was no problem, and he would fall asleep like he would as if he was in Hank's office. I'll be back after I answer all of Al's questions, I told her, and stepped out into the sidewalk, stopping to watch even more motorcycles pass by. There was a brief opening between riders for me to run across the one-way street. Like the customers at the coffee house, the people on the grassy median, the park-like structure between the two streets, had stopped what they were doing and watched the motorcycles pass too. It was interesting to see what got people's attention and what didn't. Take the Smelly Dog, for example. There was a sheriff's car, a ranger truck, and a hearse all parked in front of the groomers, and no one seemed to bat an eye at the three vehicles. Then there was a slew of bikers driving through town, and everyone stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, near the far left of the amphitheater, I noticed someone standing in the shadow of one of the pillars with his eyes focused on the Smelly Dog. Chapter 1, Hammocks, Handgun, and Hearsay.